Walk into almost any grocery store in 2026, and the shelves still look normal. That is exactly why so many households get caught off guard. The aisle does not scream danger. The package may not look different. The promotion can even feel like a deal. But the real cost can still rise quietly through smaller sizes, weaker discounts, and shelf labels that change just enough to slip past a tired shopper. And if you have felt that pressure, that is not a personal failure. It is not because you are careless. It is because the system is built to make price changes feel ordinary until your receipt tells the truth. So this is not a panic list. It is not about stockpiling your kitchen until you cannot close the pantry door. This is about protecting your money with a few smart rules, knowing which pantry foods are actually worth watching, and learning when to buy a little ahead without turning that into waste. Because once you understand how grocery value really changes, you stop shopping on hope. You start shopping on evidence. And that matters even more now because a lot of the pressure does not come from one dramatic jump. It comes from 1,000 quiet adjustments spread across weeks, aisles, and brands. The cart looks the same, but the total keeps climbing. The first thing to remember is this. The sticker price is only the beginning. A package can get smaller while the price stays the same. A sale can return with less product. A store brand can quietly change ingredients, texture, or serving count. And a lot of shoppers never notice because the shelf still looks familiar. That is why the unit price matters more than the big number on the front. If one box says $4 and another says 4.25, the smaller one can still be the worst deal if it contains less food. The shelf tag tells you what you are actually paying per ounce, per pound, or per serving. That is the real number that protects you. So before we even get to the foods, here is the first layer of control. Check the unit price. Check the package size. Check the number of servings if that matters for your household. And if a promotion looks unusually good, ask one simple question. Is this a real discount, or is it only cheaper than a price that was raised first? One practical way to think about it is to slow the whole decision down by 5 seconds. That tiny pause can save you from the illusion that the loudest label is the best label. A big red sale tag is not value by itself. It is only a signal to inspect more closely. And in a store built to move people quickly, those few seconds are often the difference between a smart buy and a regretful one. Now let's talk about the pantry foods worth watching closely in 2026. The first group is rice, pasta, and oats. These are not exciting foods, and that is exactly why they matter. They are simple, versatile, and usually hold up well in storage. If your household uses them regularly, they can soften the blow of a higher grocery trip because they stretch meals without requiring a lot of extras. But there is a rule here. Buy them only in amounts your household will actually use in the next reasonable stretch of time. A giant bag looks thrifty until it sits too long, gets buried, or gets forgotten. If your family already cooks rice twice a week, a larger package may make sense. If you only use it occasionally, the big bag is not a savings. It is a storage problem. The right move is not buying more. It is matching the amount to the meals you really make. It is also worth checking whether the shape and packaging still fit your kitchen. A bargain bulk bag that tears open, spills, or takes over your shelf can cost you more in annoyance than it saves in dollars. The second group is canned goods, especially beans, tomatoes, tuna, corn, and vegetables you already use in ordinary meals. These are worth attention because they are flexible. They can become soup, pasta sauce, a side dish, a quick lunch, or a fallback dinner when the week runs long. Canned foods also have a practical advantage. They are easy to rotate if you keep them visible. Put the older cans in front, put the newer ones behind. That simple habit keeps pantry food from becoming dead money. But do not overbuy just because cans feel safe. If a canned item only fits 1 or 2 recipes in your house, a deep stash is not smart. It is clutter with a price tag. The best canned items are the ones you would gladly use next week, not just the ones you imagine you might need someday. There is another reason canned foods remain important when prices are unstable. They buy you flexibility during busy weeks. A can of beans or tomatoes can bridge a gap between shopping trips when schedules go sideways, someone gets sick, or the budget gets tighter than expected. That kind of flexibility is valuable, but only if the food is actually part of your regular rotation. The third group is flour, sugar, and basic baking ingredients. These can be useful if your household actually bakes or cooks from scratch, often enough to use them before they lose quality. They can protect your budget when they replace convenience foods, but they are not automatically smart buys just because they look inexpensive. This is where storage matters. Flour can go stale or attract problems if left too long in a warm cupboard. Sugar is easier to keep, but even then, only buy what your kitchen can handle. And if you do not bake much, it is better to skip the giant bargain bag than to watch it sit there month after month. A low price only helps if it turns into food on the table. There is also a hidden trap with ingredient staples. People often buy them because they imagine a future of more home baking, more from scratch cooking, or a more organized kitchen. But the pantry does not reward intentions. It rewards use. If the flour does not get opened, if the sugar sits untouched, if the baking powder expires before the next batch, then the money never really reached your meals. Now we move to the next group. Cooking oil, peanut butter, and shelf-stable sauces. These can move your grocery total more than people realize because they are small items that disappear quickly. A bottle of oil, a jar of peanut butter, or a decent sauce can quietly take a bigger bite out of the budget than expected, especially if the household cooks often. These are worth watching because they support a lot of meals. Oil is not a bonus item. It is a base ingredient. Peanut butter can serve as breakfast, lunch, a snack, or part of a quick meal. Sauces can turn plain pantry food into something usable without forcing a restaurant run. The buying rule here is simple. Compare like with like. Store brand against store brand. Family size against family size. And do not assume the largest bottle is the best value if your household will not finish it while the quality is still good. That last part matters more than people think. A bargain bottle that turns rancid or sits unused is not a bargain. It is a slow loss. This is especially true when you buy a large format to chase the lowest unit price, only to discover that the product gets awkward to store or harder to pour and use cleanly. Convenience has value too, and if the package makes the item difficult for your household, the savings shrink fast. The fifth group is beans, lentils, and dried legumes. These are some of the most useful shelf-stable foods in a household that actually uses them. They can be cheap, filling, and flexible. They work in soups, side dishes, rice bowls, chili, salads, and simple meals that do not require a long shopping list. But they are only a good buy if you will cook them. A package of dried beans is not helpful if the family never reaches for them. So this is where honesty matters. If your cooking style already includes beans or lentils, they are worth watching carefully. If not, buying them out of fear may just create another item in the pantry that looks responsible and never gets used. Protect your money by respecting your real habits, not your imagined future habits. There is also a time factor here. Dried legumes often reward patience, planning, and a little prep. If your routine already supports soaking, simmering, or batch cooking, then they can be a major budget tool. If your routine is too rushed to make that happen, then their low shelf price may not convert into real savings. The sixth group is store-brand breakfast foods and simple cereals. These can help, but only if you know what your household actually eats. Some store brands are solid. Some are weaker value than the packaging suggests. That is why the comparison matters. The problem with breakfast foods is that they often sell convenience and habit, not real nutrition or lasting value. A family can spend a surprising amount on items that are gone in 2 days and do not make anyone fuller for long. If cereal is a regular part of your home, watch the unit price. If it is a rare purchase, do not let a flashy sale talk you into a case that will sit unopened. Buy what disappears from your kitchen on purpose, not what disappears because it went stale. And remember that breakfast is one of the easiest places to overpay without noticing, because the same box gets grabbed again and again. Small, repeated decisions can become a big monthly leak. The seventh group is boxed broth, stock, and soup bases. These are useful because they help stretch leftovers, rice, pasta, and vegetables into actual meals. They are one of the quiet tools of a careful kitchen. But again, the trap is buying too much of something that sounds useful but has limited use in your own cooking. Some households use broth constantly. Others barely touch it. If your family uses it once every few months, a big stash is not protecting you from inflation. It is turning shelf space into storage for a product you may not reach for. The rule is to buy for repetition, not aspiration. If broth is part of your weeknight rhythm, it can be a smart buffer against rising prices. If it is just something you think you should own, skip the overbuy and leave the space open for the foods you actually depend on. The eighth group is frozen backup pantry items that support the shelf-stable pantry. Things like frozen vegetables, frozen fruit, or freezer bread can be smart if you actually have freezer room and you rotate them well. They are not pantry foods in the strictest sense, but in a real household budget, they often work together. Why mention them here? Because many families try to protect spending by loading up on dry goods and ignoring the freezer. That is a mistake if the freezer is more useful for your household than another shelf of cans. Frozen items can reduce waste because they are portionable. You use what you need, then close the door. Still, do not overfill the freezer with optimism. If you know the power is unstable, the space is already crowded, or the items end up forgotten in the back, then the good value disappears fast. A freezer only helps if the food inside survives long enough to be eaten. The ninth group is shelf-stable milk alternatives, evaporated milk, and similar backup items. These matter for some households and not at all for others. If you use them in coffee, baking, cereal, or cooking, they can be smart to watch. If not, there is no reason to force them into your shopping list just because they seem practical. This is one of the easiest places to confuse preparedness with usefulness. A product can have a long shelf life and still not be a wise buy for your home. The question is not whether it lasts. The question is whether it gets used. And if your family only uses a backup milk item once in a great while, it may be better to keep a single extra on hand instead of turning the pantry into a museum of one-off solutions. The 10th group is spices and seasonings. These are worth watching because they can make low-cost food taste like a real meal. A pantry full of plain rice, beans, pasta, or potatoes becomes far more useful when the seasonings are right. But spices are also one of the fastest ways to waste money on tiny containers that get used a few times and then sit for years. So the smart move is to buy the ones you actually use often, not the novelty blend, not the giant bargain jar of something you only need once. A good spice drawer makes basic food better. A crowded spice rack can become a museum of intentions. Spices also deserve a special warning. The cheapest option is not always the best value if it has weak flavor or gets ignored because it is unpleasant to cook with. A small amount of a product you actually enjoy can do more for your budget than a large amount of something you avoid using. The 11th group is shelf-stable meal helpers. Things like simple sauces, pasta add-ins, or dry mixes that your family genuinely uses can be worth watching, especially when they help you avoid more expensive takeout or convenience food. But this is where the guardrails matter most. If the item is only useful on a good day, or only when the household has time, or only when you feel like cooking, it is not a stable protection against grocery pressure. It is a random purchase with a shelf life. So here is the line. Buy these helpers when they are truly part of your normal routine. Skip them when they are just a fantasy version of how you think your kitchen should work. A pantry full of someday meals can feel reassuring, but it does not lower next week's bill if nobody is actually cooking them. Now pause here, because this is the part where a lot of viewers get a useful reset. Take a receipt from your last grocery trip and hold it up next to one shelf label and one pantry bin at home. That is your real system. Receipt. Shelf label. Pantry space. Ask yourself 3 questions. Will we use this in the next few weeks? Is this the best unit price we can find right now? Will it still feel like a good buy if prices do not rise again soon? That third question matters because it removes fear from the decision. If the item only makes sense if prices keep climbing, then you are not buying value. You are betting on anxiety. And that is a bad way to run a kitchen. A smart household does not need a perfect forecast. It needs a clean filter. Once you use that filter, a lot of false savings disappear. What should you skip, even if it looks cheap? First, specialty items you do not regularly eat. A discounted jar of sauce or imported pasta is not savings if nobody in the house wants it. Cheap is not useful when it sits untouched. Second, duplicates bought from fear. If you already have 3 backup boxes of something you barely use, the 4th box is not protection. It is clutter. Fear buying often feels responsible in the moment, but it creates a different bill later. Waste. Third, oversized packages that exceed your storage or your routine. A big bag of food is only a good move if it can be stored safely and used before quality drops. Fourth, items with changed ingredients or lower quality. A brand swap can make a product cheaper on the shelf but worse in the kitchen. If a food no longer tastes right, cooks right, or fits your family's needs, the lower price may not matter. This is why reading the label still matters. Not every change is obvious from the front of the package. Fifth, anything with a questionable expiration window for your household. If the best buy date is too close for the amount you would realistically use, leave it. The point is to protect money, not to create a race against time in your pantry. There is another habit that helps here. When you see a food you usually buy, notice whether the package shape, weight, or count has changed. Sometimes the shelf label stays familiar while the contents quietly shift. That is where shoppers get trapped. They remember the brand, not the math. And brands count on that familiarity. Here is another helpful truth. Stores often know that shoppers are tired, rushed, and trying to make quick decisions. That is why the packaging gets louder while the value gets quieter. That is why a special tag can look generous, even when the base price has already shifted. That is why a smaller container can sit right next to the old one and still feel familiar. Your advantage is not speed. Your advantage is attention. And attention can be trained. It can be trained at the shelf, at the freezer door, and even at home when you look at what expired because it was never really part of your routine. Before we finish, let's turn all of this into a calm grocery trip routine you can actually use. Make a watch list, not a panic list. A watch list is small. It includes only the foods your household really uses often. It might be rice, oats, pasta, canned beans, canned tomatoes, peanut butter, oil, broth, flour, spices, or a few other staples that fit your kitchen. Not all 11, just the ones that belong to your life. When you shop, compare the unit price first. Then compare package size. Then compare whether the product will actually get used. If one item is cheaper today but does not fit your meals, it is not a real win. If you see a store brand, do not reject it automatically. Some are strong values. Some are not. Judge the product on the label, the size, and how your household uses it. If you see a sale, slow down. Ask whether the sale is on a product you normally buy. Ask whether the quantity is realistic. Ask whether you are being pulled in by a deal that only works if you buy more than you need. And if you are on a fixed income, caring for a family, or just trying to keep the grocery bill from swallowing the rest of the month, remember this. Control does not come from buying everything. Control comes from knowing what belongs in the cart and what does not. You do not need to defeat the whole food system. You only need to stop handing over money to waste, hype, and convenience traps. That is the real pattern behind grocery pressure in 2026. It is not one dramatic price jump. It is a slow chain of small changes, smaller packages, less obvious labels, promotions that blur the baseline, brand changes that make comparison harder, and shoppers who are tired enough to miss the details. Once you see the chain, you can break it. Check the unit price. Watch the package size. Buy only what your household will actually use. Rotate what you already own. Skip the food that looks cheap but does not fit your real life. And leave the store with a calmer cart and less regret. That is how you protect your money without panic. That is how you turn grocery shopping back into a decision instead of a trap. If you want, keep this one simple rule in mind on your next trip. A good purchase is not the one that feels urgent. It is the one that still makes sense when you get home. and that is the kind of control worth keeping.